Newton never finished his non-radial effects of gravity. He knew there was more to it, and we have stuff coming from Lathwaite and some of the most amazing experiments I've ever seen. And so, if the Earth is growing, there could be effects that is affecting the moon to be moving further away if the Earth is growing. Welcome. We're talking about the growing Earth, and I want to just have Greg give a quick little summary, and then we're going to get into it. What you heard about it before I have. I've been fascinated ever since. But where's your chicken, John? You don't have your chicken.
Well,
ready.
you didn't give me a warning on this. I got some owls that we put out on the side of our house to keep woodpeckers away. They just sit on the heads of these owls. But anyway,
bird's the word. I didn't hear, but I responded quickly. All right. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, a little history on that. All right. The idea has been around for, I don't know, over 100 years. Over 100 years ago, people weren't really sure, how the Earth got the way it did, but there were lots and lots of theories. I would say the first person who let's put it this way. I want to say like the 30s, 40s, that era, the idea of subduction and what's a plate tectonics. That's the word I was looking for. That was formulated maybe as late as the 50s. Kind of during that era was the subduction era. And the whole idea of subduction is that the land gets kind of recycled. So the land will meet the sea, and then where the plates, I'm sorry, it has nothing to do with land and sea. It has to do with where the plates are coming together. One will move kind of under the other and then kind of bury itself back into the Earth, and it will just keep cycling over. The new material will come out where plates are falling apart, or where the plates are separating, and they'll subduct one under the other where they're coming together. And that is the accepted view. I guess 99% of geologists.
Yeah, by the
today,
60s, that was solidified as being fact, almost. Even though it's a
Pretty
theory,
much.
I was taught in the 70s and 80s it was theory, but when you
maybe it was
argue.
later than I thought. I thought the idea was being kicked around a lot earlier, but yeah, it was a lot of people
Plate
debating.
tectonics? No, I'm saying it was held as this is doctrine going forward in the 60s.
Right.
Yeah.
In the 70s. Yes, that sounds right. So along comes Samuel Warren Carey, who wrote his book, The Expanding Earth, and I think it was 1975. So even by 1975, it was already heresy to be proposing a completely different idea.
Really quick though, he was a geologist, though, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
I think so. Yeah. I don't
he was
know
he was
ton about him.
distinguished. He was distinguished geologist.
Yes, he was accepted in the field. He was a professor, I believe, and he was from Australia. So all of those things were to his credit, and yet he came out with a view which, even as early as 1975, was considered, that only idiots think of this kind of thing. And the idea of expanding Earth it's not that complicated. It's just, the Earth is literally growing out, and therefore it's not necessarily denying that there are plates, but obviously if it's expanding, then the plates are never coming together and forming a subduction zone. That just doesn't happen. So, and that explains all the geology behind it. I would say now, Samuel Warren Carey died in 2002, long before I even heard about expanding Earth or cared about it much. And the guy who's sort of taken his place is Dr. James Maxlow, who I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's also from Australia, and I think he was Samuel Carey's student. So, or maybe he went by Samuel Warren Carey. But anyway, and so he's still alive, and as you know, Jeff, I was and still am active with an organization called the Natural Philosophy Alliance, which has since become the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society. And we had David DeHilster on a couple months ago to talk about that. Now, Dave DeHilster is a huge fan of expanding Earth theory. Yeah. So he knows way more about it than I do. I just, I've dabbled in it. I have the book written by Samuel Warren Carey. This is his second book, which is called Theories of the Earth and the Universe. And I think that was written in 1987, so about 12 years later. Those are the only two books that I know of that he wrote about it. But anyway, so Dr. Maxlow has kind of carried on the mantle. I believe he's still around. I know that David had him, tried to get him several times to come to the NPA conferences, and it was just tough because he's from Australia.
Let me butt in. This is a good. All right, here. I want to show what this is. Because tell me if I'm wrong, John. Are you going okay? But what is this? What is theory? Yeah, okay. Right. Yeah, so we got to do. Let's show the video because I think
the video says it all. Yeah.
Yes. So let me see it. All right. Finish up your thought though while I get it ready. Okay.
Well, expanding Earth is just what it sounds like. For example, everybody is familiar with how the North American and African continents kind of form a little shape, and it's like they almost fit inside each other. Well, Neal Adams, he is not a scientist at all. He's an artist, and he actually was famous for doing the Batman cartoons. And he did. He came up with some graphics to show how expanding Earth explains these lines and explains the Pacific Ocean and how everything could have been formed from one landmass to growing outward and obviously being filled with something. So what it got filled with was water, the seas. So the oceans were formed, according to expanding Earth theory, from the expansion. So the original continent is sometimes called Pangaea. And this idea of Pangaea was around a couple hundred years ago. It's not new, but that's where the expanding Earth people come to play. I have another small refinement to tell you about, but maybe we should just take a look at the video first, if you got that. Now, Neal Adams, just so you know, he did speak at the NPA years ago, and this is, I think, him speaking at that.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that one. He does show it in that one, but let's just go to the video, talk about it, and then we'll go to him talking. All right, keep going. I'm going to go share it again.
I just wanted to say there's a small refinement. Neal Adams, Samuel Warren Carey, and Dr. James Maxlow are all old Earth people, in meaning they think that the Earth is billions of years old, which and so they're looking at, and here this map shows it really well. You can see how Africa kind of fits into the Caribbean Sea, and South America kind of fits into the side of Africa. So,
all right, well, it's 10 minutes long, so we can't do the whole thing probably, we'd have to share, but let's just kind of give a little snippet. And people, it's very easy to find this video. Just kind of go to YouTube and do search Neal Adams or Growing Earth or something, and this video is very popular. All right, let's see if... So
this is going backwards in time, is that the idea?
Yes, it starts out by going backwards in time. Let me see if I can get the volume here. Can you hear that?
It's very light, but yes,
right, hold on.
I can't hear what he's saying. I believe that's Neal Adams' voice, right?
All right, let's go ahead and you guys continue talking. I gotta it'll take a minute.
Okay, well, I just wanted to bring in a little refinement, and as I said, these guys were all old Earth people, as is David Hilster. I'm not an old Earth person. I'm a young Earth guy, and there's a lot of people who are creationists who obviously believe the Earth is young. We're talking thousands as opposed to billions of years old. And our views are different. We think, of course, that the flood was the most important geologic event in history. And so it's my view that the Earth is not necessarily expanding. I mean, if it is at all, nobody's measured it. So it's still not an accepted thing. I guess according to Maxlow and others, it's still expanding, but the rate is so slow we can't measure it. So that's one difference. It's my view, as I accept the expanding Earth idea, but I think most of the expansion, not necessarily all of it, but most of it occurred at the time of the flood, where the waters of the deep rose up. That's just my opinion. But unfortunately, not a lot of creationists are even aware of expanding Earth ideas. So they don't talk about it. They're not necessarily against it. They're just not for it either. So I'm sort of in a camp by myself on that. But I am not.
Let's do our part by broadening awareness of this, because I have become convinced this is real. All right, I'm ready to show it now. I figured out. I forgot to hit share sound. You guys ready?
Yep.
All right. Sorry about that. Here we go.
Here's the high-level overview.
Yeah.
We come to the Earth, well, grew to get here, the way it is now. Here is our world, our planet Earth, floating in space. We will be going backward in time, imperfectly, but done in a very disciplined manner. Please Notice there is no subduction, no rotation of tectonic plates, no twisting, no form-fitting, no altering shapes or sizes. It would be impossible for these continental plates to fit together perfectly without this being true, and yet the upper tectonic plates fit together perfectly on a much smaller planet. Yes, there's been some erosion, landslides, blah, blah, but overall, this activity is insignificant. There is a kind of conspiracy of silence among certain scientists. They know, but are not telling you, that the upper tectonic plates of Earth also join in the Pacific. Not partially. They join totally. You are asked to believe that the continents swim or drift about willy-nilly, bumping and crashing as if they were on a greased skillet. This is not true. The simple truth is apparently too upsetting to too many apple carts. We're now going forward in time to show how the actual...
That's the general thing, John. Have you heard of this at all? Ever seen anything like that?
It makes sense.
It's pretty cool.
And I remember even in grade school, what was the one continent called?
Pangea.
Yeah. And that was accepted even in the mid-70s when I went to grammar school. Because I remember distinctly that's what it was.
Yeah. Pangea is one continent. Because, well, then you got to ask the questions, too, is why there's certain animals, like we have... in Europe, we have perch, or they have perch, the fish, and on the East Coast they have perch, but nowhere else. Like you go to Asia, it's different fish. So where are these lands connected? Yeah, it is. So we have it in those areas where all of these places connected. They have similar animals, and so if perch could have spread through the Mississippi River and everywhere else, but so they are perch in other parts of the world. But like I say. It's there's a similarity of the species in these areas where the landmass touch. So that's what kind of it is, and I'll get into later. Not now, maybe a half hour or so from now. I'll just say there's the biggest reason why it's not accepted because plate tectonics was as fringe science in its origin as this.
Time, yeah.
But the difference is there was no mechanism for this growing Earth. Like we know the sun and stars can grow and supergiant planets for different reasons, but there's no mechanism known on Earth or Mars or these other planets. And so there is a mechanism, though, that I have. We'll get into it later, but I want to make sure that we understand it. It's so simple. I was talking with Jeffrey on the way back from a dentist appointment about it, and he's like, he had questions. He doesn't really believe it, but it's like, I'm convinced of it. So I'm convinced of the growing Earth. So I'll kind of just say, Greg, why don't you give a little more history then and tell us about...
and before that, let me ask a question.
Yeah, sure, please.
So, Pangea... platelets or
plates,
platelets, blood.
You're going to have your labs done today, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Now, don't people agree that Pangea existed and they're not expanding Earth people, or is it one or the other?
So with expanding Earth is that all the continents were one. There were no oceans, only shallow seas. Pangea is plate tectonics, where all of the land was on one side of the Earth and then somehow broke apart for some reason to spread around the Earth, which is what Neal says is ridiculous.
There's oceans the oceans are still there. It's just there was one landmass, kind of one big island.
Which is weird. So
that's the real Pangea. That's the theory that I remember learning in the '60s.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little bit older than you.
Okay.
Yeah, I never heard the concept that that Pangea was only on one side of the Earth, but then that's kind of what you're stuck with. Yeah, exactly. It would have to be on one little chunk of the world and then ocean over everywhere else.
Unless it was like that graphic where if it wasn't, then of course it's expanding because there's giant amounts of water and oceans. But in that graphic you showed, it didn't show that to one side. It was...
Yeah, that's his version of it. Yeah, it's the expanding Earth is that it was all evenly dispersed and water came up from the middle of these areas, just for whatever reason. So
John,
there is a
just in
lot
fairness-
of. What's that?
I was just saying, in fairness, I don't think I mean, I'm just trying to remember. I don't think the issue even came up. We just thought of Pangea was one continent and everything split from that. We didn't say, was there water too? We just didn't even ask that question.
Yeah, right,
We
right.
didn't ask, was the Earth smaller?
Well, we were younger. We didn't ask the
everything
questions
just
in
get
school.
more
You just
complete?
take everything
We
with what the
just,
teacher gives
okay,
you.
there used to be one continent. Now it's all split up, and that was all we knew. So we didn't go any further than that.
Right. Now, there is a lot of evidence, a huge amount of evidence that support the expanding Earth that plate tectonics doesn't have. For one, if you look at a dragonfly, so dragonfly is about the biggest one is the I don't know what they're called, but I have them all over my yard, and they're I don't know 4 inches long, 4 or 5. They were like 18 inches. Some time ago. I know you believe in a young Earth, Greg, but let's just say 10,000 years times some factor, whatever that may be.
Okay.
All right. So if you believe in that the Earth is older, at some point they have fossils of them being 18 inches long. So we also have winged birds and things, and I don't know how you feel about dinosaurs. I'm completely convinced they were real as any other animal, but there was something that changed in the world, even maybe different from the flood, maybe the same time as the flood, but something changed, and I believe that is gravity. The gravity was less then, and therefore the animals could walk the land and fly, being bigger and heavier without any
I don't think it
consequence.
was just gravity. I think there was other factors, but that may have been one of them.
Well, I
The
think that
quality
the
of
biggest
the water,
reason why,
in my opinion, was a big one.
but for flying birds, flying is difficult. Heavy birds
Sure.
don't fly. So you got an ostrich and some of the heavier birds that are still here. They don't fly.
Pterodactyls.
Yeah,
pretty
but
big.
they're not flying around anymore. Do you? I mean, I
No.
don't.
Yeah,
I would
no,
be concerned about walking my
I'm
kids in the park. if I
Agreeing
had-
with you.
Yeah, exactly. So you had these winged, and they were only one. There was many, many types of fossils of large winged birds. They had feathers, and that at some point, I'm not saying pterodactyls have feathers, but there's some others that they see fossils of the feathers. And how were they getting in the air if it was so heavy? So an expanding Earth could mean that it's becoming more massive too over time, and maybe why we don't see giants or something like that. That it's just I mean, bigger people have more problems with their joints. The gravity takes a bigger toll, and you also see that the land animals also are getting smaller. So just tigers.
I would just
and-
like to point out, it just so we know,
Yeah.
if the mass did not change, and I'm not saying it didn't, but
Okay.
if the mass remained the same and it just got bigger and just less dense,
Yeah.
then gravity would actually be well, there would still, just by virtue of the fact that we're further from the center because it expanded, the force of gravity would be slightly less.
Less. Yes, exactly.
A little bit less.
Yeah.
And if the mass increased as you went out, that would make gravity more.
Yes.
It might counteract that. So what you're
It
suggesting,
might,
you think
but
gravity
I was doing
is
over
more
the past
now
couple
than
weeks
it
doing
used
some
to be.
equations on this, and actually I got an image, but I'll show it later.
But
go on.
you're proposing that gravity, there's more mass. There's the gravity
Yeah.
is more intense today than it was back then.
Yes. Yes.
So there's more. So that idea is called accretion. So the idea is that somehow the Earth is accumulating matter from outside our solar system, or somehow the matter in the Earth
You're close
is,
to what
is
I'm thinking, but
converting
not exactly,
to
yes.
something else and creating more weight in the process.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
possible too. So
exactly. I don't
combustion-
believe it's creating more mass with it. I used to think like crystal.
More-
why would it be
more
expanding?
matter.
Yeah, I believe it's actually more matter being on the Earth. So
Okay,
I used to
coming from
think
somewhere then.
yes, and I have a theory about this, but I'll get into it in a second. And it's actually there's a huge amount of evidence for this too. All right, so and in math and everything, I can sum it up, but I'm not getting into it yet. All right, so just the evidence of the expanding Earth. So I was seeing it as we're watching some other videos. Maybe I'll show another one in a little bit of him talking at the NPA. So he was talking about there's like in the Atlantic there's like stretch marks. It's like it's kind of being pulled and ridges as though the Earth was being pulled, just like if it was growing bigger, it was being stretched.
Well, there's plenty
Not
of evidence of seafloor spreading, like these ridges
Yes.
and mid-ocean ridges, especially in the Atlantic. We can really see it there.
Yes, exactly. And so that there's a lot of evidence that he gets into with geology, but then again, was fighting with geologists. As we learned, we were trying to get him on the podcast. We found out he has passed away, Neal Adams. So
I just want to point out that the plate tectonics people have an explanation for that. They don't
Yeah. Well,
deny
good.
its
Let's
existence.
hear it.
In
Let's
their
hear
view,
it.
well, there's plates there, and the plates are pulling apart.
Right.
Some places they're coming together, some places they're pulling
Right,
apart.
subduction.
And that's where they're pulling apart, and so we're getting new matter coming up.
Right.
So that's completely consistent with either theory. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yes. There's there's a couple things that aren't consistent with plate tectonics. If you consider the mass growing, there's another issue that's going on. Is a lot of people believe. I think everyone is consistent believing that flowering plants and fruiting plants started at some point, but hasn't always been that way on the earth. And so maybe I should wait on this one. But other aspects of the earth being different were that it was, let's just say, 10,000 years times some factor that puts it where traditionalists believe it's 300 million years ago. All right. So, you understand what I'm saying? So creation is some factor of 10,000. Where for people who believe in Darwin, it still doesn't. Timeline doesn't matter to me. Some point though, there was no flowering plants. There was ferns, mosses, and things that grew in an overcast condition. So we do have here in Florida, we have ferns because we live in the forest. But ferns don't grow in the desert. They may.
So you're saying there was a time on Earth when there were no flowering plants. What's your evidence for that?
Not my evidence. This is what, like I said, the traditional botanists believe, and the reason is because they don't find any fossils of these flowers beyond a certain point, nor of bees and other things later. So, if you believe that God created the earth in a succession, as Scripture says, timelines may be different by a factor, then He created things in certain order. And so the scientists believe that honeybees only came around 150 million years ago, yet there were ferns and dinosaurs before that. And flowering plants and fruiting plants didn't occur until around that point either. And so what I'm going to propose is part of the mechanism is that the entire planet was overcast. And so that there was a lot more troposphere above our Earth. And so the clouds were thicker, the sun didn't shine through as much, and therefore that's why flowering plants just could live in that time period. It was just overcast. So we talk about the Great Flood and things like that. That might have been one event. I believe it happened I believe that there was a Great Flood. The Greater Dryer, I think it was out around the time period. And I'm completely convinced of it. But I believe that there's another process that was going on for a long time and is still going on. And while I'm not a climate alarmist, if what I'm going to propose is true, then we need to be listening to Elon Musk and start exploring other planets. Because there is some process that is going on that I'm going to explain. So let's just put it this way. Mars, most people believe, used to have water and plants just like we do here. And it lost its troposphere somehow. And I believe that the same thing is happening to the Earth. And that is actually why the Earth is growing, which we'll get into. But first, I want to show, that's one thing, is that the fossil records suggest that 300 million years ago, ferns and certain types of plants. I can get lists of the names. Yeah, you go ahead, say what you're saying.
Well, I just want to challenge what you said about flowering plants.
Yes.
Because I go, according to the Bible, flowering plants, I believe, were created on day 3 of creation. And let me just read Genesis 1, verse 10 says, verse 11, and God said, let the earth bring forth grass and herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed was in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth
you're
grass.
You're reading too fast for me. I'm not following. Give me the timeline. What it's saying. Third day. What else happened? What happened on the second day?
The second day, that's first day was light was created. The second day was the heavens. The waters were separated. That's all happened on the second day.
That goes along with my theory too. The
third day was plants, basically. So
third day was plants.
As I understand,
I'm with plants, but third
creation.
A day could be a long time.
Yeah, first days is creating the light, and the second was creating separating the waters. The third was creating the plants, and then the fourth, fifth, and sixth day correspond to the first, second, and third day, in that each of those realms was populated during the fourth, fifth, and sixth day. So day 4 we see the earth, the moon populating, and the sun actually being created on the fourth day, and then the fifth day we're populating the plant world, and then the sixth day were the animal world. So that's kind of creation in a nutshell. Anyway, bottom line, it was all done by day 6. Whether you want to argue it was day 3 or day 5, that flowering.
I don't want to argue it. This is my thought on this. Okay. So my thought is, my faith, it does not rely on timelines. So if God himself came back and said, Jeff, I don't exist, I'm still believing him. I still have faith. That's irony, because he came back and told me. But I believe it anyway. And I don't care if all of a sudden the timelines change, because Scripture also says a single day is like, or 1,000 years is like a single day to God. So that's in Scriptural too. So the order of how things happen, I don't know. The mechanism and the purpose that God created it, I believe.
Okay.
But separating the heavens, what was it called?
A day is not necessarily a day as we know it. It could be 1,000 years.
Right.
Okay.
So let's separating the heavens from the waters is what it says on day 1, right, or day 2?
That's day 2.
I believe it's coming back.
Okay.
That separation is ending.
Okay.
And I believe that's what happened to Mars. So I believe it in different ways, which we'll get into. But I wanted to kind of talk a little bit other thing about any evidence of the growing Earth. Do you see any other evidence of the expanding Earth that would have
in Scripture?
Any evidence other than that Plate-Techtonics wouldn't have?
I'll just be clear. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on the evidence, so just to be clear, but I was going into Scripture, and I'm just trying to think. I don't think there is anything. Scripture is silent on this point. Did the Earth expand or did it not expand? I don't think it says yes or no. So we just have, we get what we get. But it does say that the waters of the deep erupted to cause the flood, and I think that has a lot to do with the expanding.
That fits exactly what I'm talking about too. I totally agree. Yep.
So we're on the same.
Yes,
exactly.
Exactly.
Well, but it doesn't say and the Earth expanded. It doesn't say that.
Well, it doesn't say that was the beginning of day 1 either. That was somewhere later. The Earth erupted. So that's what I'm trying to do right now is find that mechanism right there of Earth erupting from below and letting water out.
Before you get into your theory, I'm anxious to hear it. Mm-hmm. But what I want to do is just say a couple things. I believe that there are chemical processes, if you want to call it, going on inside the Earth, and there always have been. One thing we know about the pre-flood world, you already addressed this, is that there was this. It never rained. They didn't know anything about rain. You look up Noah. But they were nonetheless. They had to have been getting water. It's inferred, I guess, that water was percolating from the soil. And I believe that whole water ecosystem that they had in the pre-flood had a lot to do with why people lived to be 900 years old and why dinosaurs lived, which, by the way, another name for dinosaurs is just dragons. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's talked about in Job. So these creatures existed post-flood as well.
Well, so really quick, some people believe that the Leviathan means saltwater crocodile. So
I don't
That's
accept
okay.
that. I'm not saying that they necessarily do today, but what I do believe is some creatures just keep growing, and reptiles, a lot of them do just keep growing their entire life. So if they lived longer, then they got bigger. And anyway.
And if gravity was weaker, they wouldn't have to fight against that either, too. So.
But anyway, if the Earth was let's just suppose it didn't gain a lot of mass. Let's just suppose it was actually smaller and just denser.
Yes.
Then just in general, when things get messy, they tend to expand more. They just,
I agree. I used to think it was crystalline structures in the Earth could be growing because
really
crystals grow.
And really, really put together very well, and there was no waste or anything. It was just very efficiently packed.
Right.
And then a lot of that was lost, and somehow this water, which had been chemically processed, under the Earth, that was a big part of that. That whole system changed. And yeah, maybe there was, some people say there was a canopy above the earth. I don't know. Maybe there was. Maybe
So
there
with that
wasn't.
eruption here, so what we're talking about is minerals in the mantle, serpentine and other hydrous materials such as amphibole and chlorite form in the Earth's mantle during the process of subduction, according to the traditional thing, when an oceanic plate is forced beneath the continental plate. These minerals contain water molecules deep in the Earth's mantles. And these minerals carry water from the Earth's surface into deeper layers. So that's interesting. It's going down. But water gets trapped. Now check this out. And when it meets with lava, let's go to that. We got a number of issues when water hits with sulfur, that explodes. But so when oceanic plates, this is traditional method, sink into the Earth's mantle during subduction, they bring with them water-saturated sediments and hydrous minerals. These minerals trap water in their crystal structure. As the plate descends, the pressure increases, causing the minerals to become unstable and release the trapped water at greater depths. So at certain depths in the mantle, let me sum this up, increasing temperature and pressure. I'm not good with these things. Increasing temperature and pressure cause the hydrous minerals to break down, releasing the trapped water. When the water is released in the mantle, it lowers the melting point of surrounding rocks, causing partial melting of the mantle. This process creates magma. But what you have is in the same areas, you always have this play between water and lava, like in Yellowstone and Old Faithful, and this pressure of water shooting into the atmosphere and lava and all this. So we have this under the earth we know is going on, where water is kind of going further and further down, meet with the lava and causing explosions and things like that. And so it's not ridiculous to think that there is a huge caverns of water underneath a large explosion and all that came up onto the surface and caused a great flood. There's nothing prohibiting that. There is enough water down there to do that, especially if we're in a different time period, and what I'm going to get into in a little bit. But go on what you were saying about the flood, because I just wanted to show that's the actual mechanism for it actually happening.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know that I had anything more to add, but I did want to also address something you said about the fossil record shows only ferns, but it shows nothing else.
No, I didn't say that. I said there's a list of them. I can get that list. It's right here.
Past a certain point. Well, okay. Oh, yeah. You said past a certain point in time.
They were plants that lived in low light conditions. All of them. That I will stand by.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Okay. So I got a couple points that are a little bit tangential.
Okay.
But they do get. Anyway, first of all, I don't accept this whole idea of a geologic column to begin with. I don't believe that there's some layer that's dated a million years older than this layer that's on top of this layer.
I agree with that. I don't like that either. It's very
been shown in
science.
A laboratory that one layer, a lower layer, can actually be later than an upper layer if they're forming simultaneously. And that actually can happen. In other words, they're both forming at the same time. The lower layer is slightly ahead of the upper layer, because that's the way sediments, they do separate themselves out in layers like that. That happens, and that can happen over a matter of minutes. It doesn't take long, and so it's possible for the lower layer to be younger than the upper layer somewhere else.
Absolutely.
And that actually, and by younger, I mean a few hours younger. I don't mean millions of years younger. So that's what we've actually seen, sediments forming in the laboratory. We see the Grand Canyon. We see all this mini canyon that was formed after Mount St. Helens looks exactly the same. And that thing carbon dates to, I don't know, a couple 100 million years. And we know that it's since 1980 that whole thing was formed. So, I just challenge the whole geologic column idea. So when you say this is older than that, I challenge the premise to begin with. But I was going to speculate that.
Well, let me say something. Yeah, all right, finish that. I want to respond.
Able to make, fossils, but I don't know. I know you see more ferns in fossils, but anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so there certainly are. You can make fossils today. It's not hard if you have the stone, the right type of sand. And so I get it. What I'm kind of getting at is that it is consistent with mainstream science, what I'm going to propose. But definitely, I am convinced that the Earth was almost entirely cloudy at all times.
Well, that's the other thing I wanted to address.
So I believe that. All right, go ahead.
And I want to just throw that in with the flood. Obviously the flood was very disruptive. Whatever happened, it was majorly impactful. Maybe Mount Everest was formed during that time. I don't know. I mean, I'm open on a lot of that, but anyway, there's quite a bit of again, I'm not an expert. I just know what I've heard from a lot of people who are creationists who've got good arguments for this stuff, that there was a period of time post flood where there was a lot of cloudiness, and let me see if I can say this right. There was so much overcast for like years and years and years, like, centuries. But it happened that the oceans were actually warmer. So because the oceans were warmer, there would be more evaporations over the ocean, which would then cover the land, and then that would make the land colder. So the land was colder and cloudier precisely because the oceans were warmer. I'm probably not doing justice to the argument, but that's
I understand.
what I recall. And that is what they call the Ice Age, that period of time. And that is also referred to in the Bible. I'm trying to think, it was the time of Peleg when, I got to find that. But there is evidence that sometime after the flood, I'm talking like a couple hundred years after the flood, there was talks about the lands being separated. I got to find what I'm talking about. But it's consistent with the idea of there being a lot of cloud cover. So I'm agreeing with you, and I'm saying I think it was a consequence of the flood. So.
Yeah, and so what I'm saying is I'm not interested in the timeline. I'm just saying at some period in our past we were overcast for a significant amount of time. That's all I'm saying. And I also believe it was the same time as when you had all of the ferns growing and all of the low light types of plants. And then after that, as the sun started to come out, so to speak, as the clouds dissipated, then flowering plants that require more light, they would actually then start to be
and I'll buy
more
that.
Prevalent. That's all I'm saying, because that's all that's required for this mechanism.
At all, but they probably grew more readily during that period. I'll agree with that.
Well,
but the seeds were there.
It is, it is still. Okay, it is very possible that the seeds were still there, but for example, my forest back there, I 2 winters ago I cut down half the trees, and all of a sudden these weeds started coming up that year for the first time ever because they hadn't seen light, and so then they were there, and those seeds can last pretty much forever. We're finding seeds from ancient Egypt that are still still fertile, so seeds last a real long time. So I'm not getting into that. I'm just saying that there was a period where there were only ferns, or not only ferns, but those type of plants. And flowering plants didn't exist because of that. Honeybees weren't there. So maybe that, I don't know all of that. So for me, maybe Noah came about and carried some honeybees onto the ark. But whatever reason, they weren't in the rest of the world. That's all I'm saying.
Yep, I agree with you. By the way,
so that fossils records are not found of them in that period, if they can actually date that properly, which I don't believe they do. But it like I said, it's not evidence of the mechanism. The mechanism, I'm just describing that this is one way that it will work, and then we'll get into it. But go ahead, what were you going to say? Because I do want to deal with all of this.
Coincidentally, my backyard is full of moss. It never gets any light, and I have to buy this moss killer to get my yard
take
to
the
look
trees out
again. Well, that's what I'm trying to get to grow. I love the woods, and so I don't want to take.
Well, in
I want,
Florida, it's not. I don't. We get black widow
what
infestation and other problems because of our woods. So, anyway, the neighbor back there took down 50 plus acres of pine trees. So now we don't have as big a threat of. I hear the coyotes further off. Let's put it that way. I mean, I'm not a woods guy. I like big sky. I like to see the sky. So if we were living in a world where it was completely overcast, I would be miserable. I would hate it. So I like big sky, and I also don't like the woods either. I mean, I like the desert. When I lived out in the desert, that was the happiest time of my life. So one day I might get back there.
There was a year, and I want to say it's like 550 AD, some crazy number like that, where there was no summer, where it was overcast, so overcast, apparently because some volcano, Krakatoa or something, erupted enough.
Yes, that
it literally covered the entire earth with this ash, and there was overcast ever. So this is long after the biblical stuff. There was at least one year where it was that overcast, and I think it was like this. So I would guess there have probably been others. times when that's happened.
So, all right. So let me just kind of like I don't want to beat around the bush. Let me just give
Let's
the
hear it.
mechanism.
I'm
Okay.
anxious.
So the mechanism is gravity,
Okay.
rain. I will show you a picture. Give me a second though.
Okay.
Let me give a picture of the troposphere as currently understood, and a stratosphere and some other things. That's good.
So this is the mechanism for expanding Earth.
Is gravity itself.
So do you think expanding Earth is pretty much a constant? It's been expanding for
Yes,
a long period of time?
I do. I believe it's
rate?
continuously expanding, and we need to be concerned about a couple things in the
So
future.
we should be able to measure it. Is that
Yes,
fair?
I think we would be able to, and I think we are. Hold on.
So
let me-
oceanfront
yeah.
property, we should get a little bit more ocean.
No,
every year.
that doesn't work with this way though. No.
Okay.
This way, the water
more
levels are going
water,
to
but-
stay the same
Okay.
because it's the water is being pushed up at the same rate as the land.
But the quantity of water isn't going up, or is it?
No, if anything, it's going to go down.
Okay, but it's covering more area. So
It
it's
is.
not
All right. So, all right.
just-
no, that's okay. I'm going to find. I want to show
trying
you.
to
I want to
figure
show
out where your head's
No,
at.
it's- all right, John. Why don't you chime in, man? John, chime in. I'm ready to give my mechanism here.
So we're worried about, so those who are worried about the oceans rising from global warming, is it being counteracted by the Earth expanding? I don't know.
I don't know. I want to hear Greg's while I'm looking for this.
Well,
We're
does it
just
make
talking
sense?
about
I mean,
climate
honestly,
change and that.
John, tell me what you think. Just as a
Well,
layman,
here's
if
well,
the
here's
Earth
my
is expanding, isn't there going to be more land if the Earth is expanding? And
I don't
why
think
would
it's
you do
necessary.
that?
I wouldn't. If it's expanding, it's at such a small rate. It's hard to quantify.
Okay.
Otherwise, they would have done it,
Yeah.
and that's my opinion.
Okay.
Now, climate change, yes, it's real, but yes, there's a lot of it's to put money in the globalist pockets, and everybody. Why is it that everybody that's
For instance, like paved roads, but even if you don't like
Hold
a
on.
tax,
I don't know why they're doing that.
here I have written for you a list of
look, blah, blah, blah.
Hold on. There's some video
I'm
playing in the
gonna
background.
talk
Go
like
on.
that
What you
guy.
had to say wasn't very interesting, I guess, John. Sorry.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
I'm sorry. I just
No.
get ready. I had no idea that
I'm
video's
saying
playing.
the climate change thing is there's anybody that's involved with that is making a lot of money. Al Gore, all these people, they always use China and slave labor to do their parts for their solar panels. It's a big global scam. They're all a bunch of hypocrites. They all drive around in planes because they're superior. This is a globalist type power grab for resources, in my opinion. Now, yes, it's real. Yes, we could do something about it, but it's been co-opted by pseudoscience and just BS, scare tactics.
Yes, I think that the climate change is something that I don't think many scientists would disagree. I think people have a problem is the propaganda of it and whether humans are responsible
100%.
for any of it. All right, I'm gonna just show my mechanism, and then you guys want to move on to something else. That's fine, but I did want to share it. Okay, I'm
Show
gonna
me your
present two
mechanism.
pictures here. Two pictures here. One
Oh yeah.
of the Earth. It's very simple. The one on the right is our current Earth, and the one on the left is the size of Neal Adams' video. So this actually is 300 going 10,000 times K, all right, equal to 300 million in traditional science things. So look to the right one first. This is what we have. No, sorry, the one on the right is Neal's. I'm sorry, the one on the left is currently ours. Now, I don't have any land masses or anything here. But if you take this blue circle, that's the solid
When you
structure.
say ours, do you mean you? Who do you mean by ours?
Current state.
The
Our current, today's Earth.
conventional understanding.
No, today's Earth,
Okay, I see.
provided
All right,
you don't
go
believe
ahead.
it's flat.
And this was Neal's hypothesis.
Providing you don't believe it's flat.
Like when it
Well,
started.
I didn't have time to prepare. Ignore the picture on the right for a second. To the left is our Earth, all right?
Okay.
And those rings around it are different levels of atmosphere. Okay, if you take the blue, circle the very center, that's our surface with the ocean, okay? Obviously, there's land masses on it, but let's just assume that that's our Earth today, okay? That's the size. Each of these are to scale. There's a little white line you can't really see around that circle. That is a thin layer of our atmosphere called the troposphere. It's where all of our water vapor exists.
Is it outside or inside it's outside the light blue, right?
It is touching the earth, the surface of the water.
Okay, so it's inside the light blue then. Okay.
Yes, it's inside. It's a tiny white line. You can't really see it. A tiny, thin little white line touching the blue. You can't see it. Then there's light blue outside there. That's the stratosphere. And then there's another one. So, and I'll give the molecular structures of each of these. Okay, so what I'm saying is that because the Earth was smaller, and I believe it was less massive, which is why dragonflies could. You guys can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why I believe the dragonflies were 18 inches long in this time period was because the gravity was less, and therefore the atmosphere could be expanded out further. So now look to the image to the right, and if you take all the water from the oceans and you put them into the atmosphere, that white line now becomes that very thick band around the green circle. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
That is what I believe is water vapor. That was the
They had an enormous troposphere.
But compared to some planets, it's minuscule. It's just big compared to ours currently. And that would explain the heavy overcast skies. So as gravity would start to pull rain droplets to the Earth, what would the rain droplets do? They cycle and be evaporated back, but what would some water droplets do?
Evaporate on their way down?
No, that would be going back to the atmosphere. No, they'd sink between cracks and rocks and valleys and go underground. There's small crevices where they can't evaporate. So we see this in Florida where we have sand for like 300 feet deep, and the water it goes down and it just keeps going down. There's no fine line between the water. Our line, it's like if you put fertilizer, it can go all the way down into the wells. So in other parts, like up in Ohio, there was this rocky layer that's trapping the water, separating the water from the surface of the earth to underneath these layers. So what I'm saying is that as water goes down, some of it will be lost into certain small crevices and be trapped as the ground crumbles or moves around it, and it's down there permanently, never to go back to the atmosphere. And so there's a cycle that's going where water evaporates and comes down, and then a portion of it evaporates back out and then goes back down. And over time, more and more and more gets trapped beneath the crevices of the earth, and the crevices of the earth grow, which is why you get the volcanic eruptions, mountains moving. Water will cut through an entire mountain. And if you build up enough pressure with the mechanism I was explaining earlier, you're going to get that the land on the surface is going to start buckling outward, expanding, and less of that troposphere will exist over time. So if we really do have a very, very microscopic thin troposphere compared to what we used to have, then we will have equivalent to what Mars has in some time in the future, very near future. All right, let me see if I can escape
And it might
this.
be the natural.
So we're heading
evolution
towards
of
where Mars is?
I believe
Well,
so.
it's a natural evolution of a planet, and all planets will die, right?
If this is true, and it is easy to test, I can simply boil water with some rocks in a jar, in a container, and see how much is trapped and lost over time. If I create this cycle in a terrarium or something, some's going to evaporate and go back up and eventually condensate and come back down. But if there's enough crevices beneath it, it's going to go down further and further and further and stay there, and it won't be able to evaporate until it gets to the point where it meets lava, molten, rock, and it gets trapped in I don't remember the name of that mineral we were talking about earlier, and that process then repeats and explodes. That will create mountains and things like that. But what I envision, and this would be consistent with traditional science, is that we're finding fossils of fish on top of mountains. So, and even in areas where there's no volcanoes. So that could be flood, it probably is, or it could be a combination of both, that the mountains also too are coming up. We definitely know the high pressure is causing water to go into the atmosphere. You can just go look at Old Faithful and you watch that geyser repeat. That is exactly what's happening. So that process can repeat on a very slow scale, or it can, and maybe not cyclic. but also it is cyclic because our the water evaporates and comes back down all the time. But I sit there and watch clouds form out of a perfectly blue sky, and it's fascinating to see how how that happens. And then they come down. But I definitely know water gets trapped in the Earth's crust and not to be re-evaporated. So if that is the case, then we can look back to a time in the past where there was a lot more water vapor in the air. It was probably very humid and maybe even hotter because we have a larger atmosphere. I don't know if it'd be hotter or colder. But it is a theory. It's just not just a hypothesis, actually. But it is a mechanism that would explain how the Earth would grow. The water was outside of the surface of the Earth, and it came down from
the
gravity.
matter that's being accreted is water.
What's that?
You think that, in other words, we're getting more mass because there's more matter, and the matter is water. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, more. So our gravity, if it's in the atmosphere,
and it's coming from outer space somehow.
No, it's just coming from outside of the surface of the Earth.
So there used to be more water above.
Yep, in the sky.
Now, there used to be more of it than there is now.
That's what I'm proposing. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. The name I'm having a brain fart, but there's a kind of water that's under the surface of the Earth that has never become part of the water cycle. It's not salty. It's what's it called?
Primal water.
Primal water. Thank you. I forgot the name. Anyway, so
I just believe that's water that got trapped a long time ago.
Okay, so that water, when I say never is relative, you mean it's just it could have been at some point.
Yes, that's what
but somehow got trapped. So there's a lot of trapped water down underneath.
That used to be in the sky. It used to be able to easily go back to that system and go into the atmosphere, but then the land shifted somehow, maybe from a large downpour. You've seen mudslides. They move the land pretty quickly. So
that is actually consistent with Scripture, because Scripture talks about the waters being separate, the waters below and the waters above being separated.
Yes, exactly. And we're returning to that point.
That have a view of this canopy of water. And that somehow this canopy of water seeped. You're saying seeped into the earth.
Yes.
Made the earth expand.
Yes.
And I'm buying that.
It's consistent with the fact that the Earth has gotten, the surface of the Earth, our distance from it, whatever, is getting heavier and heavier. It's more massive because it as you know, with the gravity, the Earth itself has had the same mass, but where you are and the radius and all of this affects where the force is impacting on you. So if you go to the top of Mount St. Helens, or no, let's say Everest, you're going to weigh a little less because you have to take the average surface level of the Earth based on that.
You weigh less because you're higher up, you're further from the center.
And so you have this issue where if the water is now below you, that's going to affect the way the gravitational pull on you.
Sure.
Because there's more mass below you. And so, and then if there's more mass below you, you've seen I've seen floods. It tears through ground and whole mountains just come down. And if that's going down underneath the earth, and you hear they detect these earthquakes in that, in the ocean all the time. And it could just be that the water's seeping in, all of a sudden the ground just shifts and puts it, and that water's buried. And as it goes down further into the mantle, it's going to create a lot of pressure. And that's when you get the mountains growing, because the water's going down, the earth comes up. There's a million different ways you could model this. You could do this with baking. You put some water and some dough. You could do so many different ways to test this. But it is not one that I've heard before. It's just a mechanism. It's not even a theory, just a hypothesis. That would be one way that the earth would be growing, and it fits with everything.
Let me ask you a couple questions about that. So if you were to take, and add up all the mass of all the earth plus the canopy, which presumably existed at some point, and add up all of that mass and then compare that to the same thing today, would they be roughly the same numbers?
Probably, roughly. So I was kind of trying to do some calculations with how fast hydrogen leaves our Earth.
We lose a little matter. We also gain.
We lose a little bit, but then we have some comets hitting us too. So I don't know. It's probably impossible.
But that's minor compared to the amount of water that
I think so. Yeah, if you look at that image, that's a huge difference of water up there that eventually has come down, and rain does come down. And if the Earth was smaller, it would come down slower.
Well, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights.
There you go. So yeah, let's look at that image. Just now that you understand where I'm kind of going with again.
So
look at that.
you're saying that rain had to go somewhere. It went into all these crevices
Yes.
and made the earth expand.
And maybe
I'm
more
buying
so
that.
over time, because
buying
at
the
first
center.
maybe
I
there
like
were no
that.
mountains, there weren't any crevices, just swamp marsh, and so it could easily get back up there. But as
But now then that explains that supports my view, which is that most of the expansion took place over a very short period of time, mostly during the flood year.
there's no reason it couldn't. Like I said, I'm not interested in the
could have been
timeline.
some
I'm just saying the
before and after,
process.
but most of it happened then. That's
Yeah.
what and it sounds like your theory supports that.
Yeah, and this is actually to scale. I kind of actually measured water vapor, the distance of the molecules from each other as liquid water, as versus gas. So this is to scale. I spent a lot of time on this, that white troposphere there. So if that was the surface of the Earth, I'm assuming a constant rate of growth on the Earth, but it could have been cataclysmic. But that kind of puts it back that I said, okay, this is happening if like I was looking at Neal Adams' timeline. He did, I think, 200 million years, whatever. So I just said, well, if it was here and this is how big it is now, and that was continuous process, and so I kind of did the math on that. So that white surrounding there on that is essentially that's the troposphere. That's what I would get as the water molecules, how far apart they are as a gas, and
in your
all
view,
of
the
that kind of
troposphere-
turned into liquid. Yeah. And
The troposphere was further out than it is today,
Yes.
but the Earth was smaller than it. Both.
so the gravity would be impacted less, so it could be further out. Yeah.
So was the water canopy, in your view, in the stratosphere? That's where it used to
No, well, so the troposphere to stratosphere is kind of like more on a gradient. It's not a firm,
Yeah, no, I
sharp
get
line
that.
like this one. So yes, you'd get fewer and fewer water molecules as you get into the stratosphere, and the reason is because I think it's because it's reactive with ozone and some other things, and so it would just.
But in your view, was there a gradient? Was the most amount of water right at the surface, or did it increase up to a point and then decrease? You understand what I'm saying?
I would say probably. The most. Well, I don't know. I guess it would be similar to how it is now. So is the water vapor more concentrated near the Earth, or is there a space where there's not, and then it increases and then it decreases? I would expect I wouldn't
good
have a
question.
problem
I don't-
seeing that if it goes from less density to increased density in a band and then come back down into
Well, I would
decreased
say,
density.
clouds are clearly more dense, water dense than right? Unless you're
And they're
live in
higher up,
London
but sometimes
where
you
you're in
see
a
them.
fog.
But sometimes you see fog, yeah, on the surface. So I don't really know the layers of it, but I think that's something easy to test. I mean, you can test to see how much water vapor is in the air with the barometer. So, but I would be. There's other issues too that affect the water vapor. So the heat of the Earth, as that's why I think it probably goes on a gradient where it starts as less and then increases as it gets cooler and cooler and cooler, and then tapers off and then drops off to nothing as it gets closer to the stratosphere. My guess, and I'm not.
But in your view, this canopy of water wasn't water like in the ocean. It was water
vapor. Yes.
So we had a
clouds.
lot more, and
Clouds.
I mean a ton more, and that's
Yes.
many tons more water vapor, but less actual water.
Which is why, yeah, exactly. But it still could be stored in this amount of space as accurate. It's not. I mean, you've seen planets; they vary in size, so there's nothing wrong.
In your view, that's why people live to be 900 years old, was because of the way the water vapor was.
That would be a stretch for me. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying it's part.
That
of
was at least
my
a part of it.
mechanism. I think it explains. I don't know how people would live longer without sun. Or direct sun, or with more water vapor, but unless perhaps the atmosphere was healthier for people, as long as you could breathe. I mean, if there's more water vapor, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
People go in, when they're very sick, will go in hyperbaric chambers,
That's
which
true.
is just compressed
That's true.
oxygen.
It might be the way that our bodies
I believe
prefer
there
it.
was a little bit of that going on.
It wouldn't surprise me, but I definitely believe it was very humid. I would have hated it.
I
But
think you would have loved it.
well, I was in one
Humid
of
in a
those.
good way.
Yeah,
think there
exactly. I'm thinking that now because I'm Florida. When I was in Ohio, I couldn't wait to be in it. So now I'm here, and it's like I experience a few summers. The humidity is pretty
I
rough.
would say we're probably less influenced by the sun. You wouldn't have deserts. You wouldn't have sun beating down on you. It would just be dispersed everywhere and just kind of nice all over.
Yes, exactly. It wouldn't be that way until you start getting mountains and then you start getting the desert conditions. Because it kind of seems that the deserts always form in the valleys between mountain ridges, is what I've seen. I mean, I don't know what the Sahara is. Just around.
So what do you think, John?
I missed a bunch of it.
No, the theory. What
do you think of Jeff's theory?
Mechanism. The Earth's growing because of gravity, because of the rain.
I'd say because of water. That's what I'd say.
Well, the gravity pulls the water out of the sky.
Now, is there any other scientific data supporting the Earth expanding?
Yes,
because it's easily measurable, right, with technology.
That the Earth is expanding is a little trickier because it can be written off. I was asking Greg if there's anything with the expanding universe that has evidence that can't be explained by plate tectonics.
Yeah,
so everything anyone would say with expanding Earth, they'll probably say, "Oh, plate tectonics covers that." What plate tectonics doesn't cover is how all the land could be on one side of the Earth, and two, this explanation too is why were there only ferns? Why weren't there any flowering plants at this point? And mine is because there was more water in the atmosphere because it was a smaller Earth. So smaller Earth, larger atmosphere. So I also believe this is the thing. If this is the case, I think it should be something that is taken seriously enough. I'm not going to go around preaching into conferences and stuff. I don't care enough about it. But if it is, and this happened in a small amount of time, then we will lose our troposphere. We will. It will evaporate. It'll just stuck in the crevices. Now the good news is we could just sit there and go down to Goldfield mine over in Arizona and just stick a little pump there and spray it right back in the atmosphere. It would dehydrate. It would evaporate really quickly. So we could always get the water back in the atmosphere. But if we wouldn't
do that down at the Sahara, I guess. Huh?
Well, like I said, I know Arizona, you only dig 100 feet and you got water. So
that's why that Goldfield abruptly
abandoned
stopped.
it.
Yeah, because
filled
got an
with water.
aquifer and it done.
So it wouldn't be hard to put the water back in the atmosphere if that is the way, or at least kind of as a regular thing. But it would have to be. I mean, and in Arizona, you could do it with solar panels. You just have a cycle just to pump out water, do the Old Faithful, thing. So I'm not saying you could pump that much out. I do think that it should be observed. Is this happening? And certainly it is possible to be happening. We know there are crevices of the Earth that are trapping water. Not all the water gets back in the atmosphere. It would have to, otherwise the water in the atmosphere would have to be decreasing over time, unless water is being produced up there, which it's not. So if you think about that cycle, if you're dumping water on the Earth and it goes down the mountains and it gets stuck and it can go all the way down to the Earth here in Florida, like 300 feet under the ground, it's not evaporating very easily. And if it goes to some little cavern that goes away from the ocean and deep into an underground trench, it's not coming back out. And that's what I believe. I believe that primal water, they say it never has interacted with the surface, but we don't know that. We don't know that. There's no way to say that. It's theorized that that's the case.
So in your view, Jeff,
very well could have been something trapped a long time ago.
There was very little water at all inside inside the Earth at one point. Is that
I believe equal to the amount that the mountains have risen.
That's how much. What's equal to the amount that mountains have risen?
That's how much water has been pushed down there that wasn't there otherwise. 70% of our roughly 70% of our planet is ocean.
Sure.
And it was enough to push the lands apart. But I don't believe that it all came. Now that we have the oceans, it may not be getting trapped as much. But if you had, if you go back to Neal's video, if there was no mountains and everything was just going inside, then it would be like a water balloon. The surface is dry, but the inside is filling with water, and eventually, it can erupt. So,
what I'm wondering, Jeff, in your view, now we know that any combustion process, you take a fuel plus oxygen, and it creates carbon dioxide, which is the one that everybody's worried about, and water. So, just common sense tells me we know there's been combustion over the however old the Earth is. And so I would guess that there's more water today and more carbon dioxide today and less oxygen today than there was some time ago. Do you agree with that?
Well, like I said, I was trying to figure out if there's a cycle with combustion. Yeah, exactly. Because I was trying to figure out, like, as hydrogen escapes from the Earth, how likely is it to actually reach the atmosphere? Because it's going to interact with ozone and all sorts of free.
How much hydrogen are we losing?
Well, I don't think very much, because it's very, very, very reactive with free oxygen. Right. So if it's even in the vicinity in the upper atmosphere somewhere, it's likely to bond with oxygen somewhere. And so I don't
think we're getting more water.
I don't believe we are getting more water. I think we're getting less water in the atmosphere, more water from the atmosphere.
But I'm asking how much total in the total system. Is there more water or is there less? Or what?
No, I believe it would be roughly the same. I mean, but
wouldn't there be a little more just because there's been combustion processes that's happened?
Little more water molecules or more free oxygen?
Well, again, all combustion processes has a fuel, a hydrocarbon, something, plus
a small amount
oxygen
of water molecule
equals water plus carbon dioxide.
Yes.
That's the way combustion works. So there should be more water and more carbon dioxide and less oxygen and less fuel than there was at some time.
You would have to do the math, and I think it'll get tricky because you have living organisms that are also doing processes that can break down water.
We know that some combustion has happened, and it's pretty much irreversible. It doesn't go the other way. So,
well, I'll be honest with you. I first thought when I heard the expanding Earth, I thought that there was some chemical process governing it, and I thought that crystals growing, molecules are changing. This is what I thought since I first heard Neal Adams speak. What year was that we were watching? I want
to say 2010. But maybe
that's when I first met him. I first heard him, and last time I ever spoke with him. But it was very it was cool. It didn't have a profound effect on me, but I definitely thought differently about this. Sure. But I used to think what you're saying, but it doesn't. Sorry, I had this darn gnat. It doesn't explain one process: the dragonflies being 18 inches long. That always comes back to me. That's a big one. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that gravity was less.
Lower, somehow.
But that's how dinosaurs could have walked the Earth being very big, and they're not anymore.
There could have been a lot more canopy water, just a ton more canopy water. So that doesn't dispute that.
Right. I don't know exactly.
I'm just saying the total water has gone up in some way. That's all. And that doesn't dispute anything.
It wouldn't doubt me. There could be two processes, but I definitely believe that the water is going from the atmosphere into the Earth at a greater rate.
That's the more important thing.
I think it's more significant. I think there's a lot of little microprocesses going on. Yes, it's chemical reactions, but I think that is the big one because it can happen very, like you said, very quickly. A significant. I mean, hurricanes here they turn the ground to quicksand. I mean, I could after every hurricane, we drive out of town. I come back. I like to push my front tree because it's going like this in the sand. It's just going. It's like quicksand. Okay. So these water is, and that's just. I mean, you're talking about a few hours of rainfall, but it's a lot of rainfall. But it's only one storm. And if you think of that, of how much water, if that water was up there, what damage it can do to the crust of the Earth here, significant. And I believe that it did. And then as more water, as that crust gets broken apart and moved, there's more areas to trap water, further, keeping it from being evaporated. Mm-hmm. So if everything was flat, just some low hills, a lot of swamps, a lot of overcast, it evaporates pretty evenly off of a planet like that. But if you have mountains and deserts and things like that, it's very different environment, and you're going to get the evaporation is going to be significantly different at different parts of the Earth, and
that
therefore
brings up a good question.
The absorbing the water in certain areas of the Earth would be more significant too. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, my question was, you mentioned mountains, so I'm just thinking, I'm being devil's advocate here a little bit because
nobody else is.
The plate tectonics people, are saying mountains were formed because two plates are coming together and they're pushing against each other and it just has nowhere to go but up, and that's their view. So in the expanding Earth idea, we have to admit that if everything's sort of relaxing and expanding out there shouldn't be any high spots. So why are there mountains?
Because I believe that if you've seen a hole in anything, like if you just start pouring water into sand, you'll see that crevice starts to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I believe that the crevice of the Earth is probably in different locations, as Neal has shown in some of his maps. It is happening more in certain areas. So the water could be going in, and then the Earth coming out on the other area. So I believe plate tectonics certainly is, the plates could be moving if there are plates. The land is certainly moving. So land could certainly be shifting here if water was being absorbed onto the crust over on this side of the planet. So I believe that water, once there was a hole created, a significant hole, huge landmass move, and they all move in unison.
So you're not opposed to there being plates. You're just saying that.
I'm just saying the Earth is growing. It explains so many things that plate tectonics doesn't. Like I said, I want to know why dragonflies are that big. I want to know why dinosaurs were able to walk on the Earth. Why the only large living mammals are in the water. Less gravity. How would that be possible if the Earth wasn't growing?
Right.
And then I think
oxygen.
Yeah.
Before.
Why would oxygen affect how the birds
come
would
back
fly?
to the hyperbaric chamber, and people were living to be 900 years old, and dragons or dinosaurs were living to be enormous sizes. So
I missed the 900-year.
So
that's from the Bible.
So the thought is this: where we're talking about, we were talking about last year. So there's certain genes that affect aging.
Yeah.
And so it is not. I mean, people don't. Yes, people do eventually die if they get hit by a truck. But if they don't get hit by a truck or don't die from any disease, it is the gene that affects the aging process. Sure. And so if you, with certain mutations, that gene could be enabled or disabled to do whatever you want. And it is theoretically, I mean, aging, the hair turning gray, every process of aging is from that gene or that series of genes. So Christians, or at least the early Christians, not all Christians today, believe that in Noah's time they were living to be 500 plus years old. Now, when I was growing up, and I know this was the evil Catholics.
There's no archaeological evidence to support that. It just says it in the Bible. But I mean, if you look at, did they dig up bones that they say, oh, this person is 500 years old? I don't think so.
There's plenty of bones of giants. I mean,
yeah, there are those
tons of bones.
But that goes with the Earth was less less massive.
Yeah. Now, were those post-flood giants?
And that goes way beyond biblical times. Way beyond.
What's that?
Like, just the archaeological bones.
So, John, you got to understand, Greg is a creationist, so he doesn't believe there's anything before.
But how does he explain dinosaurs at all? They don't exist.
They're just animals.
They're just animals. There's dinosaurs in the Book of Job.
How do you explain the Grand Canyon?
He talks about the behemoth,
the billions of year old rock there.
Well, what we were just talking about.
I don't believe in a geologic column. I
don't either.
That whole
premise.
That's
got a lot of errors in it. Explain that again to John, because it could be better explained anyway to somebody who doesn't understand. I'm familiar with it, but I would say dating rocks is currently a joke, John. It's currently a joke.
Well, they date fossils too.
Fossils is different. Let's talk about the rocks. Let's talk about
the rocks, and they use the rocks to date the fossils.
Yes, you can't do carbon dating on a rock.
What they do.
You can't do carbon dating on a rock.
It's all based on the same thing. Anyway, if you can go, John, you can look at like the Grand Canyon or the mini Grand Canyon, it's called, that was formed from Mount St. Helens. That is unbelievable. We know for a 100% positive fact that was formed after 1980 or in 1980. And it looks, and people have dated those rocks. They have the same deposition, these layers that are formed. You can form layers like this in a laboratory. And it's also possible. It also happens that the layers are formed simultaneously. So you might have layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. While layer 1 is still forming, layer 4 is also forming, and it's possible for layer 1, which is deeper, to be younger than layer 4. That we can reproduce this in a laboratory. This is not. I'm not making this up.
Understood.
I'm not guessing.
But when you have dinosaur fossils embedded within these layers,
and I've
do you explain that?
I've been to South Dakota. I've actually been a couple times out dinosaur digging with a guy who was a creationist. And the bones, of course, within each layer, the heavier stuff settles to the bottom. I mean, it's real simple. And so we know exactly where these bones are going to be found, and they're swept along
But
into these
creationists
various layers.
Basically, they came up with this when, like in the 19 whats?
Well, no, I mean creationism has been around
to rationalize Christian.
Creationism has been
the
around
belief
for
that the
a long
Earth
time,
is
but
5,000 years old. But there, I mean, what were there creation? It just, I have a hard time with it. And it doesn't mean I'm less Christian. It means that the scope of God is a lot larger than what we knew with our feeble little minds 5,000 years ago.
Right. Listen, I grew up believing, and talking about the book of Genesis, I grew up being taught that it's all just an allegory and it's just a nice story. It's not really how things were. And that's what I thought. And I remember my sophomore year in college, I met my first creationist, and she was telling me, she was a creationist. And I literally, I'm not kidding you, John. I thought, how could they let anybody that's this dumb into Stanford University? I mean, I can't believe I didn't know there were people this dumb. That was going through my mind in 1980 when I first met a creationist. And about 1986, I read a book called In the Beginning by Walter Brown, and my worldview changed completely. I realized all the evidence that there is for young Earth, and we haven't even talked about that, but it's just overwhelming.
Look at this picture really quick.
And I changed my view. So all I'm saying, I'm not saying, the mainstream view is one thing, and you can believe that, but there is so much evidence to believe otherwise. It's just overwhelming. But Mount St. Helens is really good.
And that view has been completely strategically put in the corner as garbage collectively.
Sure.
We've
been lied to about
everything. Well, yeah, exactly. The scientific community is flawed.
Sure.
Forever.
Sure. But all I'm saying is Mount St. Helens is a real good example. There was runoff that occurred, within months of the eruptions that created these canyons, and these canyons have layers just like we can reproduce in a lab. And we date the rocks, and they come to millions of years based on the same kind of dating we used in the Grand
Even
Canyon.
though we know they're only a couple years old.
Even though we know that they were definitely formed in 1980.
This is a big deal.
That's a big deal.
Well, understood. But if you dug down anywhere, even without a Grand Canyon, you would still see.
Well,
but how they measure the date by the layering, though.
That's what the flood hypothesis basically says, is that we would expect to see all this layering happen. It's because of water deposition. Water.
And the same thing with the icebergs. You can dig down like a mile down and see actual dangers in the ozone or whatever,
right?
And you can predict exactly this.
John, it's the same thing. The mainstream scientists and the creationists are looking at the same data and having completely different interpretations. Welcome to the real world.
It's the same thing with the expanding Earth and plate tectonics. We can look at a mountain and see it in two different ways. But I'm interested in what can't be explained by the other. So the carbon dating, people need to let off the carbon dating, because it doesn't take much to throw off the radioactivity of carbon. You can leave something out in the sun for a few minutes and it'll affect its carbon dating. So people need to really lay off that one as an argument for anything. I, for one, like I told Greg, my faith does not depend on timelines. So I don't really care what it is.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, so I'm like, you could say 10,000x. It could be a factor of 1.0001 times 10,000 or 1,000 years, x. I don't care. I'm only interested in, the processes that cause it. Greg, you went out. Oh, there you go. Your lights turning green for a second.
Now?
Yeah, you're good. Did you see it too, John, or is it?
Yes, there was a green screen.
Turned green.
Maybe the higher ups didn't like what I was thinking.
No.
Greg is actually AI.
Yeah.
He glitched. All right, good. Okay, so.
Well, I had a couple more questions.
Please go ahead.
So again, what I'm wondering, in your idea, would the pressure have been the pressure of the troposphere? Would it have been greater or less than it is today, in your view?
With smaller Earth, it probably would have been roughly the same.
The same pressure? Okay.
Yeah, because the Earth would be smaller. So what causes the pressure is the gravitational field of the Earth.
Well, but also the
which
quantity
caused
of the water
expansion.
vapor, if it was
The
higher,
water vapor would cause it to be thicker, but with a smaller Earth, it would be less. So some balance between the two, where it'd be livable atmosphere. I don't know exactly, but I don't think it would. It certainly would change. I like to look at what animals were living there.
Yeah.
Were flowering plants living that time? They were not. We don't, or at least we have no evidence that they were.
I disagree, but okay. But maybe to a lesser extent.
All
That's
right,
possible.
but now that you see that there's water, that water could have been there, and it does as a mechanism, you might be not totally turned off it, because it doesn't go against anything anyone has said.
Well,
It's just saying at some point, that if you cover up the land, you're not going to get any flower plants. You're going to get trees. I have this in the forest. Like I said, when I took down those
That's
trees,
fair.
all of a sudden
Well,
flowers just popped up
so
everywhere.
the Garden of Eden was a garden. So presumably gardens have trees, but they also have plants. Wouldn't that be fair? And it had lots of food.
Yes.
So would you, would you say that you're talking about a time before the Garden of Eden? Is that what you're proposing? That there was a time that existed where there. Let me ask it this
So
way.
when I go to Garden Eden, I have a bit different religious views than you. Not that it didn't exist and that didn't represent a real thing, but so.
Were there flowering plants? If there was such a garden, would there have been flowering plants in that garden?
I suspect that there was a period of time where there was no flowering plants.
Okay.
That's all. I'm not saying that there was no flowers from day one. I'm just saying there was a period where there was no flowers.
Okay.
And therefore also, so there's species that originate that I think it's creation. All right, so a lot of creationists think, and I hate this. I think they need to stop doing it. I told you before a little bit is trying to explain things that I'm kind of going, I think I have a scientific explanation for that doesn't rely on God, but rather.
And I'm 100% with you there.
Because the moment people do that, they put their faith in something that's bad science, and all of a sudden, then they throw their faith out the window. So I get very cautious when people start to blend science and religion. I believe that they goes in hand in hand. So I believe that the mechanisms in nature were set in motion by God, and I believe that is natural law. He determined that law, and natural law takes over, and it means that sometimes poor villages get wiped out by hurricanes. But there's also, moral law, and God can rescue and
You're
stop.
a deist.
Why am I a deist?
Well, a deist says the God set the clock and then walked away and just let it run out.
No, I just said the second thing.
He's not
There's
active.
moral law too, where God can step in and have an impact on people's lives too, because that is the only reason. I wouldn't say I even have. I said I have faith. I said I have faith so strong that even God came and said He didn't exist,
Yeah.
I wouldn't believe Him. All right, so I don't have strong faith. I have seen enough real workings in my life that it's not faith. It's like more like St. Paul said. It's like I've seen, and I don't have faith. It's different. I had very little faith, and now it's like, well, I know there's a God. More convinced than we're even having this conversation.
Right. And I'm with you, Jeff.
So
I just
there's
want to
enough
say
miracles I've seen in my life. So God doesn't just leave us. He didn't just leave us to natural processes, but those natural processes were set in motion. He's with us in them, but like for example, David, it's like God could heal him in a second. Why doesn't He? Because He doesn't want to. For one reason or another, He doesn't want to. Otherwise, He would. And so there's something benefit for that for me or the world or somehow that I can't understand. But that you can't.
bad stuff happens.
Yeah, you can't run in front of a truck and say, God save me. It's just this is natural process. So I believe that the earth is being shaped and formed by natural processes that God set in motion. And I don't mind if He said it. Like I said, I've seen, we see that with Mount St. Helens creating a very beautiful canyon that looks like it would, could be millions of years old. How do we know millions of years old? We only lived our own life. So I don't look at a mountain. I don't care about the timeline. I'm only interested in the mechanism. But I've seen that the water coming from the sky and knocking over mountains, sides of mountains. You see it in California. Just drive along the road. You just see the mountains, half the mountains falling off with houses too. Sure. So isn't it they're more concerned about fires out there, isn't that right, John? Or mudslides? Fires, mudslides, or earthquakes. I think earthquakes is on the lower end of it. But.
It's everything. It's a risky area to build in, and so is Florida, and that's why you can't get insurance. And the same thing.
Everybody has insurance.
Same
You
thing
can't
in
get
risky
cheap
areas.
insurance.
Well, you can, but it's ridiculous. Some places in Florida, you can't. You cannot get insurance. So if you can't cash pay to reduce, it's the same thing in California, because it's such a profound risk that, there's just so many variables that are almost guaranteed that you're going to take a catastrophic loss as a insurance company, that you won't be in existence if you do, which is weird, because I don't think there's any more fires and earthquakes and hurricanes than there were 50, 60 in the 1930s on up. I don't understand why they're just dropping the insurance, because the frequency is not it's not increasing. It really isn't.
No, I remember it was about 15 years ago. There's 23 hurricanes in 1 year.
Yeah,
so.
But they're saying, oh no, it's because of no, it isn't. So it's I don't know why it's just.
No, insurance is a problem here in
insurance
Florida,
the fact that insurance companies can be bank holding companies as well is a problem. Have to pay up. They're like, oh, we can't do that. They need to be regulated.
They do. All right. So my point is, go ahead and wrap up the thing. We're going to end in a little bit. So you guys can finish.
I agree with you, on a lot of these things, and I actually think your mechanism is awesome. I really do. I think the pressure would have been greater. I personally believe more like a hyperbaric chamber, more oxygen, and obviously more water vapor. I think all of those things are true, and there was maybe a ton more water vapor than there is today. That's interesting to think, but yet somehow, even though it was more humid, it was more comfortable, and I don't know how to explain that one. But anyway,
I understand that one a little bit. So if you go to the desert, and in the daytime it gets extremely hot, and in the nighttime it's extremely cold, and so it probably be more of a steady temperature from night to day when it's heavily overcast.
Sure. Is California more humid than other states? Because California has this mild temperature all the time. I don't
know. California, that's the nicest thing about it. It's amazing.
Beautiful.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, San Diego, Southern is what, average?
I lived there
78 degrees.
That's right. You did. We all lived there for a period.
Yeah. Anyway, what I wanted to just rebut, if I could, and I'm a creationist, and I do look at Scripture, and I take it as God's word. I believe it is accurate, and it's not just really nice words, but it actually is God's word, and we're being told is the truth. And so now that doesn't mean I'm just going to ignore science, because I want to find out, how is this the case? So I'm always looking for things. I've been to creation science conferences, I want to, and I talk to different people, and they're just like, the NPA, where it isn't as though there's a mainstream view and then there's the creationist view. No, everybody has their own theory, and that's great. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with, maybe this is the mechanism, maybe this happened, maybe this, that. So that's creationists don't agree with the mainstream view, but they don't agree with each other either on a lot of things. So anyway, I just want to point that out, but we're all trying to answer a lot of questions. Most of us believe that the earth is young, that people lived to be 900 years old before the flood, and that somehow we have to explain all of this, and how do we do that? We're all coming up with different answers to those questions. So to me, I go back to the Bible, because I see it as my starting point. And somehow I know the Bible's right. I may be wrong, but the Bible's got it right. That's how I view it. And somehow I've got to keep tweaking until I come up with something that answers all the questions. And so far I haven't. But anyway, I also want to throw in one thing about what Scripture says. The Scripture in Proverbs 8:28 talks about the fountains of the deep, when he established the clouds and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, is what Proverbs 8:28 says. And Genesis, Genesis 7:11 says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day, on the second month. That sounds like a timeline, like he's trying to get an exact date here. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of heaven were opened. So I just want to throw this out, that there obviously were fountains underneath the earth that burst up. So some water came percolated up all at once, but it doesn't say that. It also says it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. So obviously some water was coming down.
Yeah, so it goes up into the sky. If huge amounts of water go into the sky, then it's got to come back down. It's going to take an equivalent amount of time.
But it's bringing even more came back down because the earth accumulated, in the end, had more water in it than when it started.
I think, yes. I think the process would always tend to more under the earth and less.
But there
in the
was
atmosphere.
some in the earth to begin with, and that's why I asked you a question earlier. Was there like no water in the earth to begin with? There was some.
I would imagine, yeah.
And maybe very densely
I don't know why. I haven't thought about it, why there wouldn't be, but I always go to this assumption. I started the point that there was water in the earth.
Out, Scripture says it twice. You know that there was water in the great deep, and that it was there at creation. God put it there.
We know there's still some today. So yeah. It's there now.
Mentioned in creation. So I believe there was water in the earth, but maybe not nearly as much as there is today. And that so I'm just curious. In other words, the earth expansion is related to the percentage of the earth which is water. Would that be fair to say?
Say that one more time.
How much the earth has expanded is related to what percentage of the earth contains water. So the latter.
But you have to understand that the water molecules in the gaseous state are more expanded. So.
Well, but water doesn't expand. Water is an inexpandable.
As a gas, it's a lot more.
Yes, as a gas.
That's what I'm talking. When it's in the atmosphere as water vapor, it's a gas.
But it was always gas in the liquid form in the earth, and still is today.
Yes. All right. So I'm saying
it's virtually incompressible. It's pretty close.
Yeah, it's incompressible when it's in a liquid form, and
that's what it is inside the earth, and that's what it's always.
Yes. Okay, as a gas, though, it is compressible. And
I get it, but the question I'm asking is how much liquid water is in the earth's What percentage of the earth is liquid water, and how much? If we took all of that out, how much earth would be left? That's what I'm getting.
I took a general. I don't know the answer. I just took it when I was doing my calculation. I just said 70% of the earth is water. That's all I did. I just said.
Well, that's the surface. I'm talking about.
But I even just said we don't even know if that's surface. It could be 60% as a surface. I just said all I did is if mine is only just showing the mechanism. I don't know. It's to scale based on that. 300.
Would you agree that's an important question to answer? What percentage of the Earth's volume is water?
I think that's the next step in question. Yes, I think it's important. At this point, it wasn't.
I don't have an answer either. I
don't either. So I think it's a very important question because, like I said, at this point, it's just a hypothesis. I said, how would it be growing? And I'm thinking crystalline structures. Then the question is, would it mass? I, for one, believe that the Earth weighed. That was had a less gravitational pull on us, and if water was beneath us or above us rather than beneath us, we would experience reduced gravity. I think it might even be significantly small, but it's definitely something different.
What I'm getting at is if the quantity of water in the volume of the Earth is not that much, then we have to account for the increased mass in some other way. That's what I'm getting at. It isn't water. I'd like it to be water. I'd like to agree with that, but I'm being the devil's advocate here and saying, what if
it depends what your discrepancy is. Is it because we do know we get hit by comets, but they are relatively small. I mean, they do a lot of damage, but they're still like they say, a house-sized comet passed through, it would wipe out a whole city, but it's still very small.
These are questions that Samuel Carey was trying to answer when he wrote his book, and Dr. Maxwell.
Yeah, well, I'm going to pick up his book. I want to get a copy of it because I haven't read it, and so this is just stuff that I kind of like.
They talk quite a bit about accreting matter from outside the Earth.
So I thought about that too. Yeah, that was the first thought I had. I went and said, well, there may be some, but I don't think that's enough to. And I think that's why it's not accepted, because it's not a significant amount. You would have to suspect that there must have been a large amount that came from somewhere, but we don't have any evidence to it. We don't have any reason to think it. It's not strong enough to put. You can't make a mechanism of that. This one, it's something we can test and see that this is at play, and whether there were other factors involved from outside our solar system. I believe there were, and I believe that there, in fact. Who knows? Maybe at one point, there was no water on the Earth, and then a comet hit, and that's where all our water came from.
Again, I go back to Scripture. Scripture says that there was water inside the Earth. That's why.
Now, Greg, I got to follow up about creationism. Now, you say that there's not that the creationists vary with their opinions, right?
Oh,
My
of course.
question is there a governing body? Is there a overall 90% consensus?
Well,
Look at all the different Christian denominations.
There are periodicals. There are periodicals, and they have conferences. And as far as I know, there's the one creationist conference is once every 5 years. It's not very often. And I did submit a couple of papers, and they accepted them. I was talking about the nature of light, and then I was ready to speak at this conference. And then, like a month before the conference, somebody else saw my paper and saw it was a little wacky, and they took it out.
The creationists thought your paper was wacky? No,
So would it be fair to say in the scientific community,
It must have been wacky.
creationists is a
I don't
is a
think so.
small,
I don't
is a
think it was.
small, minute portion of people that think this in the scientific
There's a
community?
lot of creationists out there. I mean, honestly,
I'm talking in the scientific community.
yeah, it's a much higher percentage than you think. I'd say 5%. It's not insignificant. It's a minority, no question about it, but it's not small. It's not zero.
Yeah, that's why I asked if there was like a governing body or a consensus.
Well, yeah, like I said,
It
there are
seems like
there's creation science periodicals, and there's the conference, and I would say, if anything, those kind of unify.
that meets every 5 years, maybe.
Exactly. I mean, listen, they're like the NPA. They don't have the budget. It's just, but it is quite a conference. They have like they have like 7 or 8 rooms going at the same time. So
what
they
year
get,
did
they get more done in 1 year than the NPA got done in 5 years. So-
Understood. Now, what year did
Creationism.
start? Or
Well, like
when
I
did
said,
it-
creationism has been around.
That's the
for
origin. That's the
millennia.
original theory.
So it was only in response to, of course, the popularity of evolutionism, which the famous case that William Jennings Bryan argued in the 20s. Oh, come on. They made a movie out of it, and I'm forgetting the name of the movie too. Nobody knows. No, you're not going to help me out. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so bottom line was evolution was becoming a real popular theory. There were creationists. They were kind of scattered. I would say the modern creationist movement began in 1960 with a book called, I think, William Henry Morris. I think it was called The Young Earth. I
And
could
I
be
remember
wrong
was
about the title.
a court. There was a court case.
Yeah,
think it
that's
was
what
in
I'm talking about. William Jennings
No, but
Bryan
it was in PA. It was recently.
and
'Cause
Darrow.
they were teaching. They were teaching it in public schools, and there was a judge that was Christian and kind of thought like, okay, I'm open to creationism, and there was so much overwhelming evidence to the contrary that he ruled you can't teach this in school because he was convinced otherwise by the science that there's no way you should teach this in school. And it was relatively recent. It was in the 80s.
Well, here's
No,
my
let me
thought
go
on this,
back.
John.
I'll
Greg,
give
if
you
I may
history
come
on
to your defense, I wanted to say something really quick. So, the first creationist I ever met, and I don't remember, I don't want to say her name, but begins with a C, and we were very close with her back in the day. You may still know her, hang out with her. All right? Relationship with your brother? So, she was the first creationist I ever met. And when I first heard her open her mouth and say this is what she believed, I just stared at her like I thought she was joking. I was waiting for her laugh.
Yeah, she was Baptist, right, or something.
Yeah, something like that. But she said, I don't care what
not
carbon
that
dating says. I don't care what science says. I don't care anything. This is what I believe. The next person I ever met that was Greg. Now, this is the thing. Well, I didn't really take,
Greg's a lot more convincing.
Well, he reads more than probably me or anyone else I've ever known all put together.
I've got hundreds
So
of
if
books
there
on
was an
creation.
error or a flaw in obvious, he would have come across it. For example, you don't believe in the flat Earth, Greg. Am I right?
No, but I do believe in some of the things they say.
Okay, but you don't believe the Earth is flat because there are some problems. It's
You can
not.
fly
it's
to
not.
Australia and other things. But
Yes, exactly. So those are the things where, I've made people, and I look at them, I go, I think you are deep state somehow. You're a spy because that's such a ridiculous theory.
Yeah.
Not you, but the flat earthers. That I believe it's somehow what do they call it? Psyop of some sort. Just to
I've
make
heard
Christians look like idiots. The sad thing is, it is bringing some in. So I have a big problem with the flat Earth, and so but there are things that I think creationists should be very careful with, and that is combining the faith with science. Because one thing I have being a Catholic is that Catholics have made some big mistakes in the realm of science, and they've learned don't go there again. And so the Protestants are still kind of dabbling in this, combining, religion and science. And I keep looking and going, I want you to succeed, but if you get it wrong, people are walking out on the faith. That's more important.
I went to a Catholic church, and the guy was addressing this, and he says, they're proving each other. They both exist. It just expands the scope of God. That's it.
I was taught a lot of different things growing up Catholic school on this. I don't even know.
There's a lot of agnostic or atheists that are like, see, there's because it says this in the Bible and because of creationism.
Yeah.
None of it exists. That's what they're leveraging at the universities, which is bunk.
But you see, it has the reverse effect.
Believe it. That's what they're saying.
It has the effect of discrediting people before they even can make their case, and that's what I'm again it. But if I can, I remember the name of the film, and I remember watching this in grade school. And
what is it?
The name of the film was called Inherit the Wind.
I haven't seen it.
And it was basically about the Scopes monkey trial, which was in 1925. So I had the year right. I just couldn't remember what it was called. And the one who was arguing on the behalf of the creationists was William Jennings Bryan, and the one who was arguing against that was Clarence Darrow, who was a famous author. So, and of course, the movie makes it look like William Jennings Bryan is a complete babbling idiot, and that Darrow is this genius person for doing what he did. The truth is neither. The truth is that and you just a minute ago mentioned a case where where can someone be allowed to teach creationism in school? That is not what the Scopes monkey trial was about at all. It was actually the reverse. The case was, can someone be allowed to teach evolution in school? And the winner, the one who won the trial, was William Jennings Bryan. And so the guy had
1930, right?
1925
that happened in the 80s.
Yeah, I understand. We're talking about something else, but this sets the stage for a lot of things. So back then they had fake news back then too, and the news media were 100% behind Clarence Darrow, and they did everything they could possibly do to make Bryan look like a fool. And of course, and they succeeded. And I think a lot of people were deeply influenced by that. So I would say if there was one event, the first event was, of course, Charlie Darwin's Descent of Man. That was, Origin of the Species. That was number one. Number two was this trial, 1925 trial, in getting people to flip, because you have to understand the norm before, even in 1925 and before and after, still the majority of people still were creationists. So it wasn't until 1960 that the tides were turning slowly, and I would say largely in part because of this trial and because of the media that this trial received, to do everything they could do to make the creationists look like bumbling idiots. So that's what I thought they were, and that's what Jeff thought they were, until I learned differently. And it wasn't until, like I said, studying modern day creationism, finding all the evidence for a young Earth. There's so many, for example, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is changing. If you were to take that number and just go back in a uniformitarian way, there'd be way too much carbon dioxide on the Earth. It just doesn't. It can't be that old if that's a continuous number. Or if the moon is moving away from the Earth at a certain rate, well, if it had always been doing that rate going on back, the moon would have been in the Earth, just a few 100,000 years ago, or a million years ago, or something like that. It just doesn't. It can't be that old. There's just tons of reasons why the Earth is not old, and it mostly has to do or the solar system. Saturn's rings, for example, are depleting, and if they were, that means going back in time, they'd be growing. And how much could they grow? It just doesn't make sense. It just can't be that old. So
I'm not
thousands of
sure.
things
You kind of lost me as a believer on this because you're always saying that it can't be, and I was like, every time you say that, I'm like, well, is there another mechanism there? It could be, and I probably could.
If we have a uniformitarian view, okay, so either the uniformitarian view is wrong, or because what that means is the amount we can measure how much is the moon moving away from the Earth every year. We can measure that. We can measure how much the Saturn's rings are losing matter.
Yeah.
So we can measure those things. So you can just say if there's uniformitarianism, if it's the same amount every year, then a billion years ago Saturn's rings would be bigger than the entire.
Well, let's go back to the moon. Not necessarily. If the planet was changing shape, then it could have been closer.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying. There's
then
always
uniformitarianism doesn't apply for some reason. What's the mechanism to cause it to not be that same number? Then we'd have to come up with some other mechanism. And
so
that's what attracts.
If the moon, all right, so the moon is moving farther away from us, but we also have to understand just on this one alone, I got a lot of just hair standing on the back of my neck going, it could be this.
Sure.
Just right off the bat. We haven't, Newton never finished his non-radial effects of gravity. He knew there was more to it. And we have stuff coming from Lathwaite and some of the most amazing experiments I've ever seen. Sure. And so if the Earth is growing, there could be effects that is affecting the moon to be moving further away if the Earth is growing. So we just don't know. It's not been studied, and as long as everyone keeps, ridiculing Lathwaite's work, which is incredible, and it all has to do with these non-radial effects of gravity. And that's
my point is this.
So every one of these things, I don't like it because I think it's question. I think what we need to do, the biggest thing is question Darwin's theory of evolution, and there's a lot of problems. Yep. So every time creationists say it has to be this, I go, ugh. Because then somebody can go dig into those problems too. So
I'll buy that.
That's the only thing.
That's why I say
don't
creationists don't agree with each other, and that's okay too.
Right, it's fine. And so as long as they agree the Earth is growing, I don't care. No.
Well, all I'm saying is there's a lot of reasons to doubt a uniformitarianist view of a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And uniformitarian means everything that we're seeing today. That's the way it's always been forever, and that just there's so many reasons to not accept that.
I don't believe that.
Some mechanisms have changed. Maybe there's been catastrophic events. Catastrophic events can change things overnight. And if you're part of the electric universe community, then you think those catastrophic events were electrical in nature.
Yeah.
Some thunderbolts of the gods came in and everything changed.
Comets,
close
to the Earth. Yeah,
that can explain some things. So I'm not saying I have I'm the only one with the truth. But what I am saying is uniformitarianism is highly questionable.
I agree with that. I think that's what
let's at least agree on that, and there's a bunch of different ways to explain it. Anyway,
I think I have a lot of problems with
the wind idea. All I'm trying to say is that the original trial was not, can you teach creationism in school? It was the opposite. Can you teach evolution in school? And he lost.
So there's a major paradigm shift. Everyone knows from the 50s to today.
But now they teach it in school.
Sure, they do, because we exactly.
But not creationism.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now it's like, can you teach creationism? Well,
not even private schools, because they get their funding from public school dollars too. So.
Yeah. So it's not. Anyway, I taught my kids scientific creationism, and I think everybody should know something about it, and you can have your own views.
I agree with that.
But
and I think it should be taught in schools.
The problem is we're not being taught any of this stuff in public school, and that's very sad.